Welcome back to my Chrome extensions crash course lesson number 2, and in today's video I'm going to be going over the Popup.html file, and by the end of this video we're going to have an extension like this. So basically a very basic clicking game, so we can click this button and we can see that this count works, and even if we close it, reload, we can see that it still works. And the reason it does is because we're going to be using local storage. And before we get started, make sure they like this video, subscribe, follow me on Instagram. But now, let's get started. The first thing that we have to do is make sure that we have our extension. So let's open our Chrome browser, click on the three dots at the very top right if you don't have this tab already opened, and hover on extension and click on manage extensions. So now that this is opened, then you should have your Chrome extension here, but if it's not, then make sure that your developer mode is on, and then you're gonna load your extension. And now we can get started. So if we click on our extension right now, then we're gonna see this white square and it's really small. So let's go ahead and change the size of it. So in the last lesson, what we did is we made two CSS files. One's gonna be for the pop-up and one's gonna be for the page. And the one that we're gonna use right now is gonna be the popup.css, because what we're going to do is select the body and we're going to play with the size of it. So the first thing that we can do is change the width of the pop-up. So let's start by changing it to 400 pixels, and then the height, let's set this to 100 pixels and see what that looks like. So now if we go here and reload our extension and click on it, we're going to see that it doesn't work. So let's go back and to our HTML file and take a look. So we can see that in my case, I have a spelling error, so if you have it too, then make sure that you fix it. And now if we go back here, we can update the extension and click on it. We can see that we've changed the size of our window. So let's make the height bigger and then the width a little bit smaller. So let's try 300 pixels by 300 for our height. So let's do that. Reload again. Click on it now, and there we go. So now that we've set the size of our extension, let's go ahead and add some elements in our popup.html. And the first element that we're going to need is going to be the text. So let's make an h1, and I'm going to add an ID of count, el, and then let's also add a few classes. So let's add a class of count, element2. The default is going to be 0. After that, we're going to have a button, and here we can add the plus sign. So basically when we click it, we're going to be adding 1 to the count element. Let's add an ID of add button. Let's see what that looks like now. So we're going to reload everything, click on it, and there we go. So we have our text and the button. So now let's go ahead and style it a bit. Let's go back here, and we did add Bootstrap, so we can add some classes here. And if you don't know how to use Bootstrap, then just copy me, and if you want to learn it, then make sure they check out my tutorials on it. But let's add a button class. Let's do button primary, and then we can also write form control and see what that will look like. So go back here, reload everything, and there we go. Let's put all this in a container to space it out nicely. So let's make a div with a class of container. Open it and put both of our elements in this container. Let's set the text align of our h1 to center by writing text center and see what that looks like now. So we should have some padding right and left here. So it's going to look like that. And then we also set the text align of our h1 to center. Let's make our pop-up smaller. So let's set the height to 100 pixels, or let's actually try 150. Save this, and now that looks a lot better. Let's add some padding top. So we can go to our container, write pt, so padding top, and let's set this to 3. Load everything again, and now we're going to have this nice padding. And let's put the button at the very bottom now. So to do that, we're going to need to open our CSS file, select the container, and then we're going to set the display property to grid, and then we're going to set the grid template columns to auto, We're also going to need to set the height property to 100% so that it would have the height of our popup.html. And let's see what that looks like now. So let's update everything. And so we can see that the button now is going to be way too big. And if we take a look here, it's going to be because we don't have a padding bottom to our container. So let's go back here and change this to py. So it's basically going to set the padding top and bottom to 3 or whatever this value is going to be. So go back here. We can close this, reload everything, and now it's going to look great. But now we need to change the sizes of our text here. So let's go back to our CSS file, select the title, so the H1, and then also the button. So I'm just going to write H1, and for the button, I'm going to use the class button. And we're going to set the font size. So font size, let's do 2rem and see if that's good enough. So let's update everything again. And actually it didn't change. I just realized that because we have to write important, which will override the bootstrap classes. So let's update everything again. And now we can see that it's going to be a lot bigger. And last thing we're going to do is add some margin. So let's go to the button and let's add a margin bottom. Let's try 4. Go back. And if you want to, you can obviously change the size of everything else, but I'm not going to really do too much CSS because I think we did enough. So now we're going to work on JavaScript, which means that we're going to open our scripts folder and go to popup.js. And the first thing that we're going to need to do is add an event listener to the button. So let's write document.querySelector, or let's actually just set a variable to equal to the button. So let count button equal to document.querySelector, and we're going to set this to add btn because that's going to be the ID of the button over here. And then we're going to write count button dot add event listener, and this is going to be on click. So on click, we're going to run a callback function, and this is going to be an arrow function. And if you know how to use them, then you can obviously just create a normal function like this. But I'm going to go back to an arrow function because I think it looks better. So I'm going to use an arrow function. And so to make sure that it works, let's just console log count btn, go back and update everything. Now we're going to right click on our extension and click on inspect, go to console. We're going to have some errors here, but they don't really matter. And we're going to click it a few times, go back here, and we can see that we get our console log, which means that it works. So now we're going to go back here and we're going to write let count, which is going to be equal to the amount of times that we've clicked the button, and the default is going to be 0, so we're just going to write 0. In here, we're going to write count plus plus, which is going to be adding 1 to our count every time we click the button. And now we need to select the H1, so let's go ahead and make another variable, so count EL, and the ID was count EL2, so we can just write this in here. Now we're going to select it, so let's write count element dot text content, and that's going to be equal to count. And now it should work, so let's reload everything, and when we click the button, we can see that we're going to be adding 1 to our count, and this is going to work really well. But now if we actually reload or do anything, we can see that it also reloads. So if we wanted to stay, so if we were at 6 and we reloaded everything, we would still want it to be at 6. And to do that, we need to use local storage. And to do that, we're going to go back here and we're going to write local storage dot set item. First value is going to be the key, and the second value is going to be the value of the key. And the key, we're going to write count, so that's going to be the name of the key. And then the value is going to be equal to count, so every time we click the button, we're going to be setting count to count. So now we're going to go back here. We're going to reload everything, and we're going to click on this button a few times, so I stopped at 12. And if we inspect it, click here if it's not big enough and go to application, we're going to see that we have this key and a value. So the key is going to be equal to count, like we set it here. So count, and then the value is going to be equal to 12, so the amount of times we clicked it. And if we close it, reload everything, we can see that it's going to be equal to 0 now. So the h1 is going to be equal to 0. But if we go back to application, we can see that this part saved. And if you want to learn more about it, then make sure that you check out my tutorial on it. But now what we're going to do is create a function. So we're going to write function, and I'm going to call it render count. And so in here, what we're going to do is, to make sure that this works, let's console log the local storage count key. So dot get item instead of set item. We're going to get this item, so the name is going to be count. So in here, we're just going to console log the value of the count key. And now we have to reload everything again. Let's click on inspect, and it doesn't work because I forgot to call it. So render count, and we have to do everything again. So reload everything, click on inspect, and now we're going to get 12. So we can see that it works. But now let's go back here, delete it, and try again. So if we go into inspect and click on console, we can see that we get null. So that means that it doesn't exist. Now we have to validate that this exists to render it. So let's copy this or cut it. And I'm going to make an if statement. So I'm going to write if, and we're just going to put this. So if this exists, then let's console log it. So log, else we're going to write doesn't exist. And now let's update this again and see if this works. So we should get doesn't exist, but then if we click it a few times, and let's close it and open it again, inspect, and now we get 3. So we can see that this validation part works, which means that now what we can do is we can set count, so this count, to equal to this, so to equal to the local storage count. And then we don't really need an else, but if you want to, then you can have an else that's gonna basically just console log something. But I'm not gonna have it because it's kind of out of lines that we don't need. And now this should work pretty well. So let's reload everything. And now if we click it, then we can see that it's gonna be set to 4. And if we close it and open it again, we can see that it's 0. But if we click it, it's gonna be set to 5. And that's because I forgot to do this. So we have to, after we set the count, we have to set the text to equal to the count. So now it should work. So if we update everything again, then we can see that it's going to work. Even if we close it, open it, it's going to stay the same. And if you want to, you can add a clear button that's going to clear it. It's not going to be too hard. And so this is where I'm going to end it. So we can see that everything works perfectly well. And if you don't really want to make a button, then and you want to reset it, you can obviously go here and always reset it. Or you can set this to a really high number, and it's going to work too. So now it's going to say that we clicked it 1,010 times, even though we didn't. And so this is going to be for this video. So I really hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, then make sure that you leave a like, subscribe, comment down below if you have any questions or any other things you would like to say. Follow me on Instagram, and hopefully see you in the next lesson.